Good morning. It's Friday, January 16th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 832 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. This week has been one hell of a month. On Wednesday afternoon, it looked like Donald Trump was going to break out his midnight hammer again and strike the Iranian regime as a punitive measure for its brutal crackdown on the protesters seeking greater freedoms and opportunities in Iran. We don't know exactly what happened, but at one point, while American aircraft were midair and closing in on their targets, the commander-in-chief summoned them back to their bases. The attack was called off. Israel may or may not have requested that. The Gulf states may or may not have requested that. It's all about as clear as mud. But I think there's one thing we can be certain of for now. The protesters have started to go back home. The regime remains comfortably in place for now. More on that in just a minute. Okay, about today's guest. His name is Jonathan Hessen. Jonathan is an Israeli. He's a Christian. He's a Druze. He's a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and he's now an FDD senior advisor on the Syria file. He and I will unpack what happened the other night in the skies over the Persian Gulf. We're also going to talk about Turkey, the Druze, the Kurds in Syria, and a whole lot more. So stay tuned. All right, in case you missed it, U.S. President Donald Trump was ready to midnight hammer the Iranian regime, and then suddenly he wasn't. Was this a final decision or a temporary decision to pause for a time? Who knows? This is not the fog of war, folks. This is the fog of Trump. Donald Trump is unpredictable. That's why our enemies fear him. They don't know what he's going to do next. From bombing Iran's nuclear facilities to snatching Maduro out of Venezuela, the inability of his adversaries to predict his next move could be his greatest asset. Our allies, I'm not sure they love the unpredictability either. The Iranian people were waiting for him to cut down the regime that killed up to 20,000 protesters in recent weeks. Right now, they're still waiting. The Israelis and the Gulfies are still on high alert, wondering if the Iranian regime is about to go ballistic, and nobody knows what role the United States might play. I'm not saying Donald Trump betrayed the Iranians or any of our regional allies. Trump could still have his Reagan moment, the kind where he brings down an evil empire. But some in the region are worried that this might be his Obama moment, the kind where red lines are crossed with no consequences. You know which one this is? Because I don't. Donald Trump is unpredictable. It ain't over till it's over, folks. If I sleep at all this weekend, it's going to be with one eye opened, and it'll be glued to the TV. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Argentina is going after the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes. Yesterday, Buenos Aires designated the Egyptian, Lebanese, and Jordanian branches of the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations. Sound familiar? It should, because the United States made the exact same move on Monday. And you know what? 2 is better than 1, except with a few exceptions like earthquakes, gunshot wounds, root canals. But I digress. In a statement following the designation, Argentinian President Javier Milei, also known as Argentine Elvis, underscored his commitment to call out terrorism wherever he sees it. This is all part of an ongoing effort in Argentina to combat terrorists and their funders after years of really lenient and horrific policies by Milei's predecessors. So yes, I like the new foreign policies down there in Buenos Aires, and I like the global squeeze on the Muslim Brotherhood. More, please, thanks. Headline 2, the U.S. Treasury Department rolled out new sanctions in support of the Iranian people. The sanctions hit figures and fixtures of the regime, including Ali Larijani, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme Council for National Security. He's the guy responsible for coordinating the regime's oppressive, bloody, and downright murderous response to the recent protests. Treasury also slapped sanctions on 4 IRGC and law enforcement commanders, as well as 18 individuals and entities involved in money laundering. But you know what I think? I think the aborted strike on Iran left the administration feeling like it had to do something, anything. We told the Iranian people to hold on because American help was coming. It's a safe bet that the Iranian people were expecting more than sanctions. Then again, I'm not sure this ordeal is over. So I guess we're just going to have to hold on and see what happens next. We know right now that there are U.S. naval vessels streaming to the Persian Gulf. So who knows? Maybe this thing ain't over. Headline 3, it's official. Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire has begun. Hurrah. White House envoy Stephen Witkoff made the announcement on Wednesday. The second phase is when Hamas is supposed to surrender its arms and a committee of technocrats will start governing Gaza. I'm not sure. Anyway, Witkoff announced the names of folks who will serve in that technocratic government. So things are moving in the right direction, if there is a right direction. Look, I hate to be the skunk at the picnic. Okay, fine. Not true. I'm always the skunk at the picnic. But let me just point out the obvious. Maybe I'm Captain Obvious, not the skunk at the picnic. But anyway, Hamas has most certainly not disarmed. Just this week, several Hamas terrorists opened fire at an Israeli tank in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. So let me just remind you here that Hamas was supposed to return all the remaining hostages, alive and dead, during phase one, and Hamas still holds on to one body of an Israeli hostage, Ron Gvili. So in other words, a lot of this stuff is still not settled. But I will say this. If Israel wants to get normalization on track again with Saudi Arabia and perhaps other Muslim countries, it needs to start moving ahead with phase two. And that may be why all of this is happening. On the other hand, if Hamas is still fighting Israel and the war continues to play out on Saudi TV screens and TV screens across the Muslim world, there will be no new Abraham Accords announced. So it's all about as clear as Turkish coffee. We're going to keep watching. I hope things stabilize in Gaza, but lots of things still need to fall into place. Okay, bonus headline 4, things are still going boom in Lebanon. Yesterday, the IDF launched strikes against Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon because, well, the Iran-backed terrorist group has continued to violate the November 2024 ceasefire agreement incessantly. The targets include recently weapons storage facilities as well as other terror infrastructure in South Lebanon. Remember when the Lebanese army said that it had successfully disarmed Hezbollah south of the Litani River like a few days ago? Yeah, right. Good times. All right, it's time to bring on FDD's newest senior advisor, Jonathan Hessen. So without further ado, let's welcome him onto the show. Welcome to the program, Jonathan Hessen.
Thank you, Jonathan Schanzer.
Okay, we're the Jonathans and we're about to unpack the news. So let's start with this. What happened on Wednesday night? Seriously, what happened?
Well, it's $1 million question, right? But nonetheless, when you look in the theater and you ask yourself, does the United States have enough assets to fulfill the objective that the president wanted to achieve? That's a big question mark. There are two schools of thought, obviously. The first one, is it a surgical strike that will provide the protesters on the ground some type of momentum to push forward and then topple the regime? Or is this a much more decisive strike that will see many various targets eradicated and dealing the regime a blow that would be a lot harder to get up from? We do hear a lot of the proxies in the region, be it the Hashd-e-Shaabi in Iraq or Hezbollah even in Lebanon, saying we might not sit on the sidelines this time around. So at a time when you see a lot of those various statements coming out of allies of the Islamic Republic, I think that the cautious maneuvering is something that should be taken into account. We do hear that today Mossad Director David Barnea has come to Washington for meetings with his counterpart and others. This is just not random, obviously, and there are many other activities that are currently taking place. Israel is still on very high alert. We do hear IDF spokesman FDD Featured coming out and also informing the Israeli public that the IDF is prepared for any type of scenario. So there are a lot of different activities taking place, all the while, of course, as you already mentioned, there are vessels coming into the theater, to include, of course, the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, a carrier with a lot of firepower, diverting its attention from the Indo-Pacific all the way to NAVCENT, or Central Command AOR. And we do see a lot of aircraft, the C-17 airlift aircraft, as well as other type of assets flying into the region. So there's a lot of buildup that we did see also prior to the June strikes, prior to Midnight Hammer, prior to Israel's Rising Lion operation. And therefore, I do not see this as the last chapter in the book when it comes to whether or not President Trump opted out or not. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu most definitely would not opt out when it comes to the Iranians. But at the same time, there is one word that is always in the calculus of every decision maker, and that is timing. Is this really going to bring about that change necessary in order to realize the goals of the objective.
Okay, great assessment. And by the way, when we talk about American assets, my understanding is that Carrier Strike Group could be arriving in the region as soon as tonight, Friday evening, just in time for Shabbat. I don't know whether that's aligned in any way, but so okay, you talked about Effie Defrin, the spokesperson for the IDF, and kind of what's being messaged. So let's talk about this right now. The Israeli posture, that defense posture. Clearly, we're talking about air defenses getting mobilized, but we don't know. Probably one of the most closely guarded secrets in Israel is how many Arrow 3 interceptors there are, and I guess that's part of what's going on. And so maybe Israel needs THAAD or other air defenses from the United States to supplement, and maybe that's what's going on. But talk to us a little bit about what's happening. I know you're not in Israel right now, but what's happening in Israel from what you're hearing?
So there's been a lot of effort put into preparedness, and Israel has not stood idly by. From the end, the 12th day of the war with Iran, Israel has been ratcheting up its efforts to rehabilitate its capabilities and even surge beyond that into potential re-engaging the Islamic Republic. The commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, in close cooperation with his CENTCOM counterpart, have held multiple meetings on those matters. We do see a lot of efforts also into mapping, preparing into a potential also counter effort to launch various aircraft in striking Iran, in joining the United States in the event that the Iranians miscalculate and launch some type of salvo of ballistic missiles or other type of munitions in the direction of Israel. And all the while, IDF Home Front Command has not altered its directives to the Israeli public. So we do understand that on the one hand, there is trust between the population in Israel and the IDF to ensure that everything is prepared for such a time in which decision making will ultimately bring about yet again such a confrontation. But there is also a sense of a buildup and more of I wouldn't say pressure on the population, but rather there is an understanding that something big is about to happen.
Okay, well, that means everybody's on high alert. I want to talk about another place where things have been on a slow boil, maybe sometimes even a medium one. I want to pivot to Syria. This is, of course, your primary file with us and maybe just in general. So what's the state of play over there? And specifically, I want to ask you just about the state of alert between the IDF and the Syrian military, otherwise known as, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, otherwise known as the Nusra Front, a state army that was once a jihadist army that is now engaged in some kind of security arrangement with the Israeli government. That it's all pretty confusing to me because this is essentially an enemy army, but there's an agreement now. So what does it look like on that border?
Well, the border is relatively calm at this point in time. Nevertheless, there is a certain buildup that is concerning, to say it mildly. The Damascus regime has erected 3 separate divisions that it has currently, including a 4th division somewhat north in the area of Hama that has jihadist characteristics through and through, including the one in Damascus. So we're talking about one division, Division 82 in Hama, which has also participated actively in the massacres back in July of last year, 15th, 17th, 2,000 Druze and Christian massacred during that attack. And those include people from Al-Qaeda, from Jabhat al-Nusra, from other type of organizations that have the same jihadi sentiments as their peers in Damascus. The Division 70 in Damascus itself, commanded by the former commander of Jaish al-Islam, the Armies of Islam, which happens to be also a Turkish citizen, believe it or not. Many of his soldiers, his militants are jihadis against Uyghurs and others that have been operating in Idlib, in other theaters, and have been on the blacklist of the United States, among others. Now, going south from there, you have both Division 44 and Division 40. And the Division 40 is quite interesting to mention because this is the one in Deraa Governorate, just adjacent to the border with Israel on the southern part of the border, where all the Jewish communities actually live, whereas the northern communities on the Golan Heights are more predominantly Druze. Those are Jesh el-Watani, the national army, which is a Turkish proxy. The commanders thereof have also operated on Turkish behest in Libya, in Somalia at some point. So we're seeing that there's a lot of activities taking place there, a buildup of forces that far exceeds what Israel would want to see. And at the same time, the IDF is preparing for various types of friction, be it attempted terrorist attacks and efforts to really entrench militarily along the border, something that Israel has, of course, said is it's not just going to stand idly by and allow to happen.
Okay, so you just mentioned Turkish or Turkey like 4 times as you talked about the Syrian army. So let's talk about Turkey's role in all this. We know that Turkish advisors have been on the ground since the changeover of the regime, the toppling of the Assad regime. We know that the Turks are helping. I mean, we think they trained up the Nusra Front before, or the HTS, before it headed south from Turkey, before it conquered all of these population centers and effectively flipped the regime. We understand that there's radar, that there are military platforms. I mean, what's going on here with the Turks specifically? You know, our listeners know, I hold Turkey in pretty low esteem when you think about their role in the region. And this increasingly looks like a state that is owned and controlled by the Republic of Turkey. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. Turkey has its hands deep inside the foreign ministry, the defense ministry. I mean, the intelligence chief of Syria, of the Syrian intelligence agency, was the interlocutor of the Turkish intelligence to both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State during the civil war. So we're talking here about a very significant relationship where the senior partner is not necessarily those sitting in Damascus, but rather in Ankara. And ultimately, we're also seeing the deputy chief of general staff of the Syrian armed forces being also a Turkic, actually also holding a Turkish passport, among others. So there is a very close relationship. Shaibani, the foreign minister, is on a near weekly basis in Ankara to consult his counterpart there, Hakan Fidan, who formerly served as the chief of Turkish intelligence, MİT, and who was actually regarded as the one who orchestrated the grooming of Abu Muhammad al-Jalani at the time as the commander of HTS, today, of course, the president or de facto leader of Damascus, Ahmad al-Shara. So this relationship is very close. The people I speak with regard to Damascus and regard to HTS actually characterize this project as one of the major projects of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, something that he has and holds in very high esteem and regards as something that will help Turkey also get out of its economic woes, at least partially, once the Turkish companies start to reconstruct that country from the destruction it underwent during the past decade and a half.
Yeah. And just so folks know, I mean, you know, when you rebuild a country, right, an entire country, there is enormous amounts of money there, right? The construction contracts, the electricity, the water, I mean, all of the utilities, the internet, the technology. And this was a country that was under sanctions. So now a bunch of technology can come in that couldn't get in there before. There's enormous economic opportunity, but I got to say, there's also military risk, right? This is the concern that I have. The Turks had already sponsored Hamas, and they were putting assets nearer and nearer to Israel and posing threats to Israel. I see the same happening here in Syria as they build this up at the same time and get rich off of it. So I'm deeply concerned. All right. I want to ask you sort of one more question, and it's, I think this is the one that's near and dear to your heart, but let's talk about the minorities in Syria for a minute. The Druze in Syria, we've got a close relationship with the Druze in Israel. The Druze in Syria have been fighting back against their overlords with Israeli help. Similarly, the Kurds. We've watched the Kurds fight back, and there have been a couple of clashes in recent days. Maybe just fill in some blanks here about the role of these minorities. Are these Israel's new allies to help counter what's going on? Do they have a fighting chance? How do you assess what's going on with these two minorities?
So with regard to the Druze, if we start in the southern part of Syria, they live predominantly in a couple of villages and towns south of Damascus, actually more of neighborhoods or the periphery of Damascus, Kol Jaramana and Sahnaya. Those areas are mixed. There are also Christians living there, as well as some Bedouin communities that have attached themselves to those towns. These are currently through and through under Damascus control, and their divisions present in the area that really keep them in check, as opposed to Sweda Governorate, whereas the predominant area where the Druze live, we're talking here about between 550,000 to 600,000 Druze. They have been under siege since July of last year. So we're talking here about a massacre that occurred. Damascus managed to seize roughly 34 villages, 3 of which have been utterly destroyed and are irreversible, or you'll have to build an entire new village pretty much. And the Damascus regime ever since has blockaded the area of Sweda and are trying to choke them into submission. There is some type of humanitarian aid flowing into the Sweda Governorate, but compared to what has been entering into Gaza versus Sweda, we're talking here about 1,200 trucks of aid since July versus what we're seeing in Gaza, which is 400 to 700 trucks a day. So you can imagine that 550 to 600,000 people, 150,000 of them displaced. They're having a very tough time. Now, they are fighting back, and they're not succumbing to the pressure by Damascus. They are demanding a certain sense of freedoms from jihadist overrule or imposing of Sharia law and other aspects, as was the case back when Abu Muhammad al-Julani or Ahmad al-Shara controlled Idlib, which also included massacres against minorities. So they wanted some type of assurances there, which Damascus was unwilling to grant them. The reason Damascus is unwilling to grant those assurances is because Turkey is unwilling to provide any concessions to the Druze that would then be construed as precedent for the Kurdish file. And then the Kurds are here also standing their ground, trying to push back. From what I hear, Turkey is behind the push against the Kurds in Aleppo and are also very keen on seeing the Damascus regime pushing even farther and taking over territories north of the M4, which is a major road or motorway going from Aleppo all the way to Iraq. Anything north of that, they would like to consolidate power over that, and then that would be the first stage to what is yet to come.
Yeah, and I think that's the big battle, because the Kurds, as opposed to the Druze, the Kurds are actually armed to the teeth, and they've got a history of fighting back, not just in Syria where the SDF has been dominant, but also in places like Iraq, and then there's, of course, Turkey itself. Again, I'm going to remind folks, the Kurds are a I mean, they're considered a minority in the Middle East, but they're 30 million people across multiple countries. This could be a Kurdish awakening. I don't know, but I think this is an interesting moment as they get pushed and may have little choice but to fight back. We're going to leave it there. Jonathan Hessen, our new advisor here at FDD. Thanks for joining me today on the FDD Morning.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Leah Siskin has a sharp piece in Cyber Scoop on how state-controlled propaganda for America's adversaries is gaining an edge in the AI arena. Russia, China, and Qatar are flooding information ecosystems with false and biased content. So let me just say this. I understand that AI is a technology that could shape the future, but I'm going to take a hard pass on that future if it means that machines are learning from Al Jazeera, Sputnik, and other garbage outlets. Seriously, folks, no thanks. FDD research analyst Mariam Wahba has a policy brief on FDD's website today, highlighting how Egypt is weaponizing its blasphemy laws against religious minorities. She cites the case of a Christian researcher who was sentenced to 5 years hard labor for posting pro-Christian content on social media. That was his crime. Mariam urges the White House to press Cairo to end these practices, which it should. Finally, FDD senior fellow Nathan Pekarsik testified before the Senate Special Committee on Aging about China's role in targeting elderly Americans through international scams. He outlined concrete steps the U.S. can take to deter Beijing from exploiting state-backed criminal schemes that prey on the nation's most vulnerable citizens. All right, folks, cue the lights, close the curtains. Show's over. And so is this month-long week, more or less. Loyal listeners know that this is the part where I tell you to read our website, follow our social media accounts, and make a very generous tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. So thank you. Tune in Monday for another gripping episode of your favorite morning show. Until then, have a great and restful weekend. I'll be the guy sleeping with one eye opened, and it'll be glued to the TV. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.